On a quiet farm where time moved as slowly as the whispering wind, a restless horse stood at the edge of the woods, eyes locked on the darkness beyond. That night, as the world slept, Apollo heard something no one else could, a faint cry hidden in the silence. And when his call shattered the night, Elanar knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The sun slowly dipped below the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with hues of gold, orange, and soft pink. Each ray stretched across the vast expanse, caressing the rolling hills in the distance. The farm rested in the embrace of this tranquil scene, untouched by the hurried pace of the outside world. The whispering wind moved through the tall grass and rustling trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and freshly cut hay, filling the air with the essence of nature's serenity. Standing at the entrance of the stable was Apollo, a magnificent black stallion whose coat gleamed like polished obsidian in the fading sunlight. His thick, wavy mane swayed gently with the rhythm of the evening breeze, a majestic creature that seemed as though he had stepped straight from the pages of legend. But there was more to Apollo than his striking beauty. His dark eyes, deep as the ocean at midnight, held an intelligence that surpassed mere instinct. He observed the world with an uncanny awareness, as if he could sense things beyond human perception. A short distance away, Elanar strode across the property, her strong hands gripping a hammer as she inspected the fences. At 25, she carried the weight of the farm on her shoulders, a responsibility she bore with pride and determination. Her chestnut-brown hair was woven into a long braid that bounced with each step, glistening under the last remnants of daylight. The exhaustion of a hard day's work clung to her muscles, but it never dulled the warmth in her eyes. She had built this life with her own 2 hands, and she loved every part of it. She finished nailing a loose board to the fence and turned toward the stable, where Apollo stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the farm. Something about his stillness unsettled her. His ears were perked forward, muscles tense, as if he were listening to a whisper only he could hear. Elanar wiped the sweat from her brow and walked toward him, setting the hammer down as she reached his side. She placed a comforting hand on his strong neck, feeling the warmth of his body beneath her fingertips. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, glancing toward the darkening forest. "Just a rabbit or a bird playing tricks on you?" Her voice was light, but Apollo did not move. He remained transfixed on the same spot, nostrils flaring slightly, his entire body still and alert. His reaction sent a shiver down her spine. She had known this horse long enough to recognize when something was truly amiss. Still, the night was approaching, and she had chores to finish. With a small smile, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a slice of apple, holding it up to him. "Here, this should distract you." Apollo took the apple, chewing slowly, but his eyes never left the trees. A quiet tension lingered between them, an unspoken understanding that something wasn't right. Elanar stroked his mane one last time before turning back toward the farmhouse, dismissing the unease as nothing more than a passing moment. But as the first stars twinkled into existence and the farm settled into the quiet hush of night, Apollo remained standing at the stable door, his unwavering gaze fixed on the forest's edge. Something was out there, and whatever it was, it had caught his attention. The night had settled over the farm, a blanket of silence draping the land. Stars glistened in the sky, their soft light illuminating the rolling fields. The distant hoot of an owl and the whisper of the wind through the trees were the only sounds that accompanied the stillness of the late hour. Inside the farmhouse, Elanar lay in bed, exhaustion weighing down on her, her mind drifting toward the much-needed rest she longed for after a long day of work. Then, a sharp, urgent neigh shattered the silence. Elanar's eyes flew open, her heart pounding in her chest. She recognized that sound. Apollo was alerting her to something. It was not his usual call for attention or food. It was a cry of distress, something deeper, more urgent. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and hurriedly pulled on her boots, her pulse quickening as she reached for her flashlight and coat. Stepping outside, the chill of the night brushed against her skin. The farm was bathed in silver moonlight, casting long shadows across the ground. She saw Apollo standing in the yard, his massive form tense, his head turned toward the forest beyond the fence. He pawed the earth impatiently, his ears pinned forward. "What is it, boy?" Elanar called as she approached, gripping the flashlight tightly. Apollo whinnied again and turned, trotting toward the trees before pausing to glance back at her. He wanted her to follow. A strange sense of foreboding filled her chest, but she trusted Apollo's instincts. He had never led her astray before. Taking a deep breath, she climbed over the fence and followed him, her boots crunching softly against the damp earth as they entered the dark embrace of the woods. The further they walked, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The trees swayed gently, their branches whispering secrets to one another. The wind carried a faint, eerie sound through the foliage, a weak, muffled cry. Elanar froze, her heart hammering in her chest. That was not an animal. It was something else. She quickened her pace, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Apollo moved with purpose, guiding her through the dense underbrush until they reached a small clearing. At the center of it sat a damp, worn cardboard box, barely illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the branches. A soft whimper drifted from within. Elanar's breath caught in her throat. Dropping to her knees, she reached for the box, her hands trembling as she peeled back the damp flaps. Inside, wrapped in thin, tattered blankets, lay a tiny, trembling baby. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The child's face was pale, its small hands curled into fragile fists. It let out a weak cry, its tiny body shaking from the cold. Without hesitation, Elanar lifted the baby into her arms, wrapping her coat tightly around its frail form. The warmth of her body seemed to soothe it slightly, and the crying softened into faint whimpers. She looked at Apollo, who stood beside her like a silent guardian, his dark eyes filled with something she could only describe as understanding. He had brought her here. He had known. Cradling the baby against her chest, she rose to her feet, her mind reeling. Who had left this child here? Why in the middle of the forest, so far from any help? "I don't know what's going on, Apollo," she murmured, glancing down at the fragile life in her arms, "but you just saved a life tonight." Apollo snorted softly, stepping closer as if to reassure her. The moment felt surreal, like something out of a dream, yet the warmth of the child in her arms was very real. With determination tightening her grip, she turned back toward the farm. Questions raced through her mind, but she knew one thing for certain: whoever had abandoned this baby had done so with the intent of it never being found. But Apollo had found it. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. The farmhouse was quiet except for the occasional crackling of wood in the fireplace. The baby lay in a makeshift crib on the couch, finally warm and resting peacefully. But Elanar couldn't shake the unease pressing on her chest. She sat on the edge of a chair, her mind racing. Who could abandon a baby in the middle of the forest? And why? A firm knock at the door made her jump. She quickly crossed the room and opened it to find Edward, the local sheriff, standing there, his face lined with concern. His flashlight flickered in the darkness behind him, and the cold air rushed into the house. "Elanar," he greeted her, stepping inside. "Got your call. Tell me everything." She gestured toward the sleeping baby, then relayed everything: Apollo's distress, the eerie feeling in the woods, the damp box, and the baby's fragile state. Edward listened carefully, his brows furrowed in thought. "A baby alone in the forest," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "This isn't just neglect. Someone didn't want this child to be found." Elanar shivered at his words. "What kind of person does that?" "One we need to find," Edward said. "I need you to take me to where you found the child." Apollo was waiting outside as if he knew they were about to leave again. Elanar grabbed her coat, and together, she and Edward followed the stallion back to the clearing. The moon hung high, casting an eerie glow over the ground. When they arrived, Edward crouched near the box, inspecting it carefully. "There are footprints," he murmured, pointing to the disturbed soil nearby. "Two sets. One's large, likely an adult. The other, smaller." Elanar's stomach twisted. "Another child?" Edward's expression darkened as he traced the tracks with his fingers. "Possibly. But the second set disappears here. The adult's tracks continue. It looks like they left something behind and took something else with them." A chill ran down Elanar's spine. "Another child, missing?" Edward stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "I'll take the box back to the station. Maybe we can pull fingerprints or any trace of who was here." But Elanar, he turned to face her. You need to stay alert. If someone left this baby behind, they might come back, or worse, they may not have wanted anyone to find out. She swallowed hard, nodding. The weight of the situation settled heavily on her shoulders. As they turned to head back, Apollo suddenly froze. His ears perked, nostrils flaring as he let out a deep, warning snort. Elanar and Edward exchanged uneasy glances before following his gaze into the dense darkness of the trees. Then, a sound, soft, hesitant footsteps. Elanar's breath caught as a small figure emerged from the shadows. A young girl, no older than 5 or 6, stepped cautiously into the moonlight. Her face was dirty, her clothes tattered, and her wide, frightened eyes gleamed as she took in the sight of them. Her arms clutched something against her chest, a torn blanket, similar to the one that had wrapped the baby. Elanar slowly lowered herself to the girl's level, speaking in a gentle voice. "Hey there, sweetheart. You don't have to be afraid." The girl didn't answer, her gaze darting between Elanar, Edward, and Apollo, who remained perfectly still, watching her with quiet understanding. Edward whispered, "She must be the second child. But if she's here, where's the adult who brought them?" Elanar didn't know. But as she reached out her hand, the little girl hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Apollo exhaled softly, as if in relief. One mystery had just deepened. But now, there was another child to protect. Dawn broke gently over the farm, painting the fields in hues of amber and gold. A crisp breeze carried the scent of dew-kissed grass and damp earth. Elanar stood on the porch, cradling a steaming mug of coffee, her eyes fixed on the 2 children inside the house. The baby slept soundly in a makeshift crib, while the girl sat nearby, watching him with a quiet intensity. It had been only a few hours since they had found her in the woods, but she had already begun to feel like a part of the home. Though she hadn't spoken a word, there was something in her posture, something in the way she clung to the tattered blanket, that told Elanar she had been through more than her young mind should ever have endured. Apollo stood nearby, his dark eyes calm yet alert. He had remained close to the girl since she arrived, occasionally lowering his head to nuzzle her, as if assuring her that she was safe now. It amazed Elanar how deeply the horse understood emotions, perhaps even better than humans did. Edward returned later that morning, his face lined with exhaustion but determined. He had spent the night searching the woods with a team, but no other traces had been found. The adults' tracks had disappeared, leaving nothing but questions. "No sign of who brought them here," he said, shaking his head. "But there's no doubt about it, Elanar. Whoever abandoned these kids didn't just do it out of desperation. Someone was hiding them. Someone didn't want them found." Elanar's stomach knotted. "So what happens now?" Edward sighed. "Social services will have to be involved, at least for the legal process. But," he glanced at the children, "it's not going to be easy for them. 2 kids, abandoned in the woods, no records of who they are or where they came from. They might get lost in the system." Elanar already knew what he was implying. She didn't need him to say it out loud. "I'll take care of them," she said, the words leaving her lips before she even had time to process them. "At least until we figure out what's going on." Edward studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I figured you'd say that." He gestured toward Apollo. "You and that horse. You've always had a way of looking out for the ones who need it." Inside, the little girl watched them through the window, her small hands pressed against the glass. When Elanar met her gaze, the child hesitated for a moment before offering the tiniest, fleeting smile. That was all she needed. Elanar stepped back inside, kneeling beside the girl. "You're safe here," she said softly. "You and your little brother." The girl didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. Instead, she reached out slowly, hesitantly, and placed her tiny hand in Elanar's. A silent promise was exchanged in that moment, a bond that neither of them could yet put into words. Apollo snorted softly, his presence a steady force in the room, as if to say he, too, was in this for the long haul. Elanar took a deep breath, realizing that her life had changed forever. The farm, once a place of solitude, was now a home to more than just her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.